I'm Mike Ward, and I'd like to welcome you to Conversations in Healthcare, a video series brought to you by DRG, part of Clarivate. In this series, we intend to throw the spotlight on the healthcare ecosystem, focusing on its current business challenges and opportunities. In each episode, I'll be talking to key leaders and stakeholders in the industry about how they're anticipating business challenges and navigating the market dynamics. Initially, our series will examine the numerous challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed on the healthcare industry. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, John Jaeger, a partner in DRG Consulting. John specializes in US pricing, market access, and reimbursement, and recently conducted a survey on how COVID-19 is impacting how physician practices are caring for patients with pre-existing conditions unrelated to the pandemic. So John, welcome and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me. Hope you and all your loved ones are well.
Thanks very much, and I hope you and your family are doing well as well. So, John, watching the news reports in the general media, we're all aware that healthcare providers everywhere are having to focus much of their attention on the acute needs of COVID-19 patients. So from your conversations with physicians, what has been the most notable impacts on their ability to actually care for patients?
So we've really seen three primary buckets. So as you can imagine, care has been disrupted quite significantly, and I don't think that's really a surprise to many. But the scale and the depth and breadth of that is still very much uncertain. So we've really uncovered three key findings. One is that specialists are reporting, again, unsurprisingly, that access to care and delivery of care is really changing, and it's forcing physicians and specialists in particular to adapt to evolving social norms. The second piece is prescribers are considering different factors when making treatment decisions that they may not have considered previously or may not have prioritized in a way that they have in this current environment. And the last piece is that physicians really do not foresee care delivery normalizing in the near future. I think most specialists see things extending well beyond the next 3 months, and for a lot of physicians, maybe not even within the next year.
Right. Okay. So, well, before we dig deeper into those key impacts that you've just communicated, could you just sort of outline the structure of the survey? How was it conducted? What types of physician did you actually talk to?
Absolutely. So, in response to the vacuum of information that existed as it relates to the impact of patients with pre-existing conditions, a lot of the patients that are already in the healthcare system prior to the outbreak of COVID-19, we wanted to get some information as quickly as possible. So we conducted a very brief 10-minute web survey with a little over 100 physicians across 5 different specialty groups. The 5 specialty groups are rheumatology, psychiatry, gastroenterology, neurology, and oncology. And as I said, the purpose of the survey was designed to quickly capture insights on how care is being delivered for patients with pre-existing conditions, particularly the sickest patients, those that are already receiving specialty biologics.
Okay, and these physicians, they're all based in the States?
Yes, this was a US-based survey.
Yeah, okay. So let's turn to, I guess, the issue that you highlight first, the access and delivery of care. In the conversations, what came up as the most prominent challenges, and how have the healthcare practices adapted to those changes?
Absolutely. So, as you can imagine, and as we talked a little bit earlier, care is being disrupted across the board. Increased patient cancellations, reduced office hours, diminished office staff, delays in receiving additional supplies and even access to appropriate treatments. And you're even seeing delays to treatment. But to answer your question a little bit more pointedly, we're seeing significant reductions in the availability of in-office infusions. As a consequence, practices are reacting in two primary ways. First, they're beginning to look for alternative treatments that can be self-administered. So in scenarios where they otherwise would have considered a physician-administered therapy, maybe through an in-office infusion or an outpatient facility, another type of outpatient pharmacy facility, they are looking to self-administered therapies. And this is really happening across the board, not only in rheumatology, gastroenterology, but also oncology as well. Secondarily, they're also increasingly looking towards delivery of care through home health. Traditionally, this has been a slower growth area and something that both patients and providers have been somewhat resistant to. But we are seeing an increase in receptivity to that, where you're seeing about 22% of patients are being reported to shifting to some type of home health option for administration of therapy.
Right. Okay. So yeah, there's quite a few insights there, which we will definitely explore. So physicians, they're focusing more time and resources to the most at-risk patients. Is this shift consistent, irrespective of the specialty, or and what about their ability to see new patients?
Yeah. So, well, the data is pretty clear that physicians are delaying and prioritizing care across specialty, but there are some variabilities based on two factors, and it really comes down to urgency and risk. So urgency being, how important is it to start or continue therapy in the immediate term for that individual patient? The second piece, as I mentioned, is risk. And what we mean by that is the extent to which treatment will expose the patient to enhanced risk for COVID-19. So including those risk factors, you start to see some interesting trends. So you look at oncologists and psychiatrists, they have the lowest levels of treatment delays. Oncologists, given the need for treatment right away, as you can imagine, and psychiatrists, given the need for treatment, but also they're not as much risk. So some of these specialty biologics that are given can enhance can reduce your immune system, and as a consequence can enhance your risk for COVID-19 and the potential downstream effects. So there's less risk for psychiatrists in treating their patients with their therapies. Rheumatologists and gastroenterologists are showing a bigger willingness to delay treatment given the diminished urgency for most patients associated with their conditions. And you're also increasing the risk with use of some of the therapies in that space.
And who's driving that? Is it physicians suggesting to patients that actually you shouldn't come and visit, or is it patients actually sort of concerned for their own health, knowing that they're on immunosuppressants, that they might be at risk by going out further?
Like most things, it's usually something in between, but the data suggests that this is primarily being driven by physicians. There is some form of warehousing that's occurring just through diminished demand on the patient side. So that certainly is a factor, but we do know that physicians are weighing these risks and treatment, and patients are relying very heavily on the recommendations of their physician. So aside from some diminished demand on the patient side with access to the healthcare system, the decisions themselves are really coming down to what the physician feels is most appropriate.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I've sort of seen in some of the sort of the general media is that there are concerns that patients, potentially new patients, are actually avoiding going to healthcare practices, and therefore there's the danger that they might not, their diseases are not diagnosed early enough. how is that risk being managed?
Sure. So there's a question that we have a little bit later, so I might be jumping ahead in terms of things that we wanted to discuss today, but I actually feel as though that could be the second wave and impact that could occur within the healthcare system, meaning that you have almost a warehousing effect, as I mentioned earlier, of patients waiting to receive care. In addition, you have all the existing patients that might either be delaying care or doing kind of the bare minimum until it's a little bit safer for them to pursue all treatment options. So the demand that is about to come on the US healthcare system over the coming 12 to 18 months could be quite significant for those that aren't necessarily facing distress as it relates to COVID-19. So that pent-up demand in the system is going to put massive strains downstream on the healthcare system, perhaps in areas that we're not quite seeing today.
Right. And having observed sort of an unsurprising jump in virtual engagement with patients, which of those changes do you think might represent a permanent change in sort of care, and which may revert to pre-pandemic norms?
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, it is really hard to say what will have a lasting impact, but we do think there's a chance this is an opportunity really for both patients and physicians to reimagine how care is delivered. Understandably, adoption to virtual care has been relatively slow and fairly stratified by age, as most technological adoption is. But as an outgrowth of this pandemic, we anticipate that overall, the general willingness to engage virtually with providers will increase. We've seen some big jumps in psychiatry, which makes a lot of sense given the nature of the discipline. We've also seen bumps in oncology. However, we don't imagine that will stay in place much further. Where I'm actually most interested to see is how this starts to impact the delivery of primary care and the extent to which this changes the willingness and nature of how maintenance care is delivered. I also wonder about low-level emergency care and how this might potentially impact adoption of virtual ways of engaging care for things such as fever and other pediatric type care. So I think there's a large degree of impact across the healthcare system, and we'll see it across a wide range of different ways. But overall, we anticipate that this will raise the willingness and the collective comfort, both with physicians and patients, with virtual care. But there will be some level of variability based purely on the severity of the condition, thinking about maybe less virtual care in oncology and more for primary care or low-level emergency care.
So do you get a sense that it will be physicians who are going to be sort of driving that greater acceptance of virtual care, or is it something that patients actually kind of recognize that there are some advantages to that?
I think in this scenario, ultimately, patient comfort is going to be critical here, particularly when you start thinking about the adoption of this type of technology with older patients. So, the bulk of healthcare utilization resides in the older population, and there's a direct inverse relationship with that and the adoption of technology. So, patient comfort and patient adoption is going to be critical, not only in willingness and comfort, but just availability of technology and being able to navigate these platforms and being comfortable with that. In-person care delivery is going to be a critical part of a viable and strong healthcare system. But finding ways to leverage virtual care in more effective and efficient ways is going to be absolutely critical, but contingent upon that is ultimately patient comfort. And if patients aren't comfortable, they won't use it. And if they won't use it, then that limits the ultimate utility of any type of virtual care.
Okay, and I mean, any other sort of changes in how care practices deliver care that COVID-19 is throwing up?
As we mentioned previously, we have seen an increase in the delivery of care through home health. And that's an area that is much more cost effective and more efficient, and giving both providers and patients increased levels of exposure to the benefits of home health absolutely presents an opportunity, particularly in the payer environment.
Okay, so the benefits, but are there any sort of challenges associated with that switch from physician administered treatment to as you say, sort of patient self-administration?
Absolutely. So it changes things quite dramatically across a range of different pillars, but three that we identified proactively was, one is just ensuring appropriate administration, right? So a lot of times the physician values having the patient go through a physician administered therapy because they can ensure that treatment has been delivered effectively and to the right dosing requirements. So obviously they lose that component. A lot of times, secondarily, a lot of times there's the ancillary benefit of a physician administered therapy is it provides another touch point with the patient. So remember, the individuals that are receiving specialty biologics that require physician administration, in many circumstances are quite sick or are dealing with a lot of other challenges, sometimes that extend beyond their diagnosis. So the ability to engage with those patients and have additional touch points with the healthcare system, whether it's with the physician themselves or even a nurse or a physician assistant, it enables another touch point, provides more information, and can help ensure better care for the patient. So you do lose that on some level with home health delivery. The last piece that by moving from physician administered to self-administered, the payer dynamics and the health insurance dynamics do shift a little bit. So there's higher levels of control by payer organizations, particularly around product choice and the order that products can be taken. There's also different considerations from an out-of-pocket standpoint. So there could be differential co-pays or co-insurances. There could be different dynamics with out-of-pocket maximums. So those situations do change things a little bit from a treatment selection perspective as well. So, those are all things that biopharmaceutical manufacturers are going to have to be aware of and start to think more critically about in the future as they're designing their patient support programs.
So have you heard, or do you have any evidence that we're actually sort of seeing patients being switched from one drug or one treatment to a different one for those reasons?
Sure. So what I can say is that the data shows two things in particular. One, we have about 22% on average, about 22% of patients that were already being treated with a physician-administered therapy are being moved to a self-administered therapy. So that's quite a significant jump. Now, there's a high degree of variability between the different specialties there, and you look at a specialty like oncology, that's a little less likely. You aren't seeing as many patients switch over from existing physician-administered therapy to a self-administered therapy. Physicians have demonstrated that oncologists, I should say, have demonstrated that they're not as comfortable switching patients mid-regimen, which makes a lot of sense. But you see for new patients, we ask the question, what percentage of patients that would have otherwise gotten a physician-administered therapy, but are now being prescribed a self-administered therapy? And on average, you see that number is about 30%. And that's pretty consistent across all specialties. So you're seeing a significant portion of the patient population being shifted over to self-administered therapies. In addition to that, what that doesn't speak to is the diminished level of demand, right? So really starting to put a sense of scale and size around what the potential challenges and diminished demand could be for physician-administered therapies in the future.
Yeah, and I guess also means that actually, drug manufacturers are going to, probably have to think probably a little bit more about how their drugs are going to be administered. Rather than if there's going to be this shift from physician administered to self-administration. So just I mean, I know it's impossible to sort of predict how long the pandemic is going to be disruptive, but I just wondered whether in their planning and the way that they've already had to adapt their practices, whether sort of the physicians had sort of any sense of how long they thought this disruption might last, or how long it would be okay for them.
Sure. So, as you said, no one has a crystal ball here, and everybody is really kind of building the bridge as we're crossing it. So this is a really tricky question to answer. So what we do know is that about 2/3 of the specialists anticipate that this will extend at least another 3 months. Now, I think that's a pretty conservative estimate, but when asked how long this will be disruptive to their practice, you're seeing at least 3 months. More specifically, a plurality of specialists, about 40% of our specialists, so just under half, anticipate that things will begin to normalize over the next 3 to 6 months. But there is quite a significant portion, about 25% of specialists do not really foresee things starting to normalize until beyond 6 months or even more in some cases. So what this tells me is that we are kind of a little bit closer to the beginning than towards the end in terms of where we sit in terms of the impact, at least from a care delivery standpoint, from the specialist standpoint. And then what this doesn't speak to is all the downstream ramifications that we talked about in terms of the warehousing of patients, the increased demand for healthcare services, and perhaps those that have been delayed in receiving treatment, potentially being even sicker than they might have otherwise been. So, more to come as it relates to this, but specifically in terms of practice disruption, you're seeing basically about the expectation is about 3 to 6 months for most specialists.
Right, and if it's not resolved soon, I mean, do you sort of have a sense of which parts of the healthcare system are going to be most under pressure?
Yeah, I think thinking beyond those that are directly impacted by COVID-19, both from a physician and patient perspective, I'm concerned about the growing backlog of demand for care and treatment beyond those acute needs today. So existing patients are delaying care. So there's going to be warehousing, as we talked about. Additionally, many new potential patients are not able to access the healthcare system now. So there's going to be tremendous backlog for healthcare beyond the strains being placed on the system by COVID-19 in the immediate term. As a consequence, that's going to put a lot of pressure on demand for specialist services in the coming months. And the downstream effects and the latent effects associated with patient outcomes in these ancillary conditions could be pretty dramatic. So, for me, I think making sure that we can provide access and leverage all the tools at our disposal to maximize the reach of our specialists is going to be absolutely critical in the future.
John, thank you very much, so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I think these findings are going to be invaluable to healthcare companies and looking at how they can support physicians, help patients, particularly in a post-pandemic world. For those who'd like further reading on this, there will be a link at the end of the video, and that will be to an executive brief that is based on the survey results. Also, if you've got questions for either me or John, there will be a link there too. So we'd love to hear from you. To tune in for our next episode, follow our LinkedIn page where we'll be posting adverts. So in closing, I'd like to thank you again, John, for joining us, and also like to thank the audience for listening. On behalf of everyone at DRG and Clarivate, I'd also like to say thank you and show appreciation to all those in the healthcare industry who are continuing to support patients with other health issues, irrespective of the setbacks and the challenges of the pandemic. Your contribution is not going unnoticed. So thanks. Until next time, stay safe, healthy. I'm Mike Ward, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.